seeing my screen okay? Okay, perfect. Thanks again, Peter, for the introduction. Thank you, Philip, for the invitation to be here. I'm really excited about it. Thanks to all the speakers for really just making this an amazing session, inspiring, surprisingly moving, and I'm really happy about that. And I wanted to thank also the audience for being here and for just caring about this stuff. It's just great to be, like somebody said, with so many kindred spirits. And so what I thought I'd do for my talk is do a little bit about my path, so people can see kind of the different directions this can go. And then also just kind of what I'm thinking about these days, and in particular, how we can kind of meet this weird moment that we're in right now. So to start at the beginning, when I was a little kid, I wanted to be an artist and an inventor. But I am from the 1900s, and so even by the time I reached high school, we still didn't have internet in the homes generally to kind of explore these, um, to explore what sorts of careers that there might be in combining science and art. So I very nearly went to art school, and I think I had an experience maybe similar to Kelly's. When I told my mom this, she said, "Ooh, didn't you really like chemistry in high school?" And so, long story short, I went to Purdue and I studied chemistry. So this goes from left to right. I had no idea what somebody did with a degree in chemistry when I started out, but then I was really lucky to discover undergraduate research. I went to work in Jean Chmielewski's lab and ended up in her lab for about 2.5 years and just completely fell in love with research. And I just decided I wanted to be Jean Chmielewski because she was so cool and an amazing scientist. And so I went off to graduate school. I went to MIT, worked for Barbara Imperiali. My plan was to go into academics. But I started to notice along the way, it's kind of the artwork in scientific journals, and that's when I really started wondering, like, who does that? And it was the first glimpse that that's a career that somebody's doing. But I still wanted to be Jean Chmielewski, so then I went to Scripps Research Institute for my postdoc, and I worked for Jim Paulson there. And that was 2006 when I started my postdoc. So a few things happened over the next few years. There was a global financial crisis. And so there were a lot of hiring freezes. By the time I was coming out of my postdoc, there were just fewer and fewer positions for more and more postdocs. It created sort of a bottleneck. And then the other thing that happened was that I had gotten myself engaged, and so now I had a geographic constraint. And so I just kind of started thinking back about those pictures I'd seen in the journals when I was a graduate student. I had told my lab mates back then, well, this is my plan B, but I kind of joked because I didn't really know how I would do it. But now I was thinking about it again. I still didn't know how to do that, and I didn't know anybody who did anything like that. But now I had Google, and I was a grown up, so I could kind of get people on the phone to talk to me about it, and that was just really useful. To talk to people. And what I really took away from those conversations was that there's not just one path into this career, that everybody's just kind of figuring it out and people are taking their own paths. And that gave me a lot of courage to try to do it myself. So um, I built a small portfolio just by creating images for my own research, for my lab, for the Scripps newsletter, and I put it on a little website. And actually, a local biotech company found it, and that was how I got my first commission. So that was kind of my jumping off point. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to sustain, pay the bills right off the bat from day one, because I still really didn't know anything about it. And so I started teaching, and I taught undergraduates and chemistry and biochemistry to undergraduates at the University of San Diego. I ended up doing that for a few years as I built up the business. And I built that up slowly, um, mainly by, I think, as Philip mentioned, kind of drawing on the network that I already had. I already had this great scientific network, and that really helped me grow the business mostly through word of mouth, through, people coming back for more work and telling their friends about it. And that was how it really kind of snowballed and grew. So that about 3 years in, I was able to stop teaching. I say I was able, I chose to stop teaching. I had kind of hit a steady state where I was having to turn away a lot of illustration work. And so I decided it was time. And I still never really made much more than a postdoc salary from freelancing, and that was okay. Um, But the kind of work that I did, I really enjoyed doing publication figures. It really allowed me to dig into the nitty-gritty details of the research and work closely with the scientists, iterating through different designs. And similar path with graphical abstracts, kind of same idea. But what I was noticing was that a vast majority of the work that I was getting was or commissioned for was for journal cover art, which is a ton of fun and really lets you kind of unleash your creativity. But I was kind of feeling pulled away from the science because, of course, you're not meant to get into the nitty-gritty details of the science in the cover. In fact, a lot of you have to kind of pull scientists back from trying to tell the entire story in the cover. And so I was feeling a little bit pulled away from the science, but around that time, I was invited to Rice University to give a talk in a visualization symposium. And I was very lucky that the creative director of the Broad Institute was also giving a talk in the same session. And that was Bang Wong in the red sweater here. And basically after that, we started working together and he recruited me for a team that he was just starting to build. It hadn't even started yet, called Pattern at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. And this was a group that was meant to explore and explain data through design and data visualization. And so I was so happy to, finally really join a team and have a steady paycheck. That was really nice. And really getting to work with people like Bang and also not pictured here for some reason, I'm not sure why, but Andrew Tang was also in this group and he created the graphics department at Cell. And I mean, getting to work with him was like a master class in design. And so while I was working with them, I learned a ton and I kind of developed this workshop that was very much built on a foundation of what Bang and Andrew were teaching as well, but I kind of have continued to refine it through the years and presented it to scientists. And I found this was something that I really enjoyed a lot. I really tried to stress to the scientists that the purpose of learning these principles is not to make things prettier. It's not to make figures prettier. It really draws on, principles of pre-attentive processing and Gestalt theories of perception. And it's really about getting information from your brain to somebody else's brain more effectively and efficiently. And it doesn't require any artistic talent to adopt these principles. It just so happens that beauty is a byproduct of good design. So that's an added benefit. It also includes a live design review. So attendees will bring works in progress and, they'll learn all these principles and then immediately put them into practice, kind of critiquing their own and each other's work so that it really starts to solidify those ideas. And then also in Pattern, I was able to do the kind of design work that I was doing before, but mostly with figures and graphical abstracts, and I really enjoyed that. I also learned a ton because the group largely did data visualization, data portals, interaction design, UI, UX, and this is something that I worked on with them. But over the years, over a couple of years, Bang moved on to another position. Andrew moved on to a position. As there was turnover, the group really turned more towards kind of the hardcore data portal, software engineering work. And so I was feeling a little bit more pulled away from the science again. But around that time, I had another opportunity that came up, which was one of the co-founders of the Broad Institute was leaving to start his own thing, and he invited me to come along. And so that was how I became the director of research communications at Arena Bioworks, whose mission was to shorten the path from discovery to drugs by putting basic scientific discovery and biotech creation under the same roof to try to remove some of the inefficiencies in between. Um, and it was an opportunity to be a part of building something brand new. So that was really exciting to me. I developed the visual identity of the company based on the Bauhaus Art School for specific reasons that I can explain if anybody's interested later. I learned a ton here too. I got some writing experience. It's something I enjoy as well. I wrote the press release that announced the launch. I worked with the executive leadership team to write reports and award nominations and perspectives. I produced all the social media content, but what I really loved was I still brought that teaching aspect to the scientists, and we were pretty small, so it was easy to really work hand in hand with the scientists and teach them those design principles both in workshops and working with them one-on-one. And I love that. And so I was starting to get the kernel of an idea while I was there. And then, unfortunately, like so many other biotechs, at the end of last year, it shut down. And so that kind of brings me to the present day, which is it's a work in progress, but I just want to tell you what I'm thinking about. Um, it's a very different landscape I'm noticing now, even than it was just 6 years ago that I was a freelancer. And as I'm trying to get back into it, I'm noticing that things are a little bit different. Um, I'm not afraid that AI is going to replace science artists and science communicators, but I am afraid that um, it's going to make things a little bit worse, that the scientists are going to use good enough versions to save time and money, and that the dissemination of science is just going to be a little bit worse. So what I think is going to be really important and where artists can play a huge role is in empowering scientists. To become better science communicators, but I also think to become better scientists. And I'm going to share some ideas about how I could see that working. Um, and I know that there are things that scientists in the audience here could start doing today, as soon as you get off this call, that they could start having a benefit. But I think there's a really crucial role for artists to be partners in this to achieve the full benefit of it. Um, I do think actually that making art with scientists is going to make scientists better science communicators. I also think it's going to create more work for science artists and communicators generally. And that sounds a little paradoxical because I'm saying let's teach the scientists how to do it, but I think it will really help them see the value of it and why it's not good enough to just use something off the shelf from AI. Um, and it to help them see that science communication is not about making science pretty, it's not about dumbing it down, and it's not about spinning it. And I think they'll see that AI then is not a comparable replacement for human practitioners, but it's a tool that we can all use. And I think they'll also become better partners in the creative process. And also, they don't have time to do all the things that need to be done. So I really see this as benefiting everybody. So I'll walk you through some of the just initial ideas that I have. I would love to hear more from other people later too. So one way I think I would work with them is working on their drawing skills. You often hear people say, "Oh, I can't draw," as if there's a binary distinction between people who can and people who can't, which isn't true. It's there's more of a spectrum that anybody can move up on with practice. Some people are born on third base in terms of drawing skills. Of course, people have different abilities, but anybody can improve and anybody can get to the same place. And so one way I might demystify the drawing process is to break it down in an exercise like this, where it would give them an image in a grid and then give them a blank grid. And then they could kind of see how you build a drawing just brick by brick with the simple lines and forms. And if they could see by piecing it together, well, I can draw that square and I can draw that square. And pretty soon they've made a whole drawing. And as they start to get more comfortable with this idea, I would encourage them to go home and, draw their hands and feet because they're always available to you and they're kind of the right level of complexity to do. And one of the people that I got on the phone with early on was when I was a postdoc, gave me this advice. He said, if you want to get better, just go home and draw your hands and feet 50 times. And so I think anybody can do this and improve their skills. And so, but the sneaky part is this is really training in observation. It's making people better, more observant, and to get them to kind of look at the world like an artist. Because when you do that, you'll see your eyes become hungry for seeing what's around you and for noticing how light falls on an object or what shadows it makes. And what if this hunger was applied to data and microscopy images? And I can just really see how that would benefit science. There's always somebody in the room who sees something in the data that nobody else sees. And what if we made everybody like that? And then if scientists get better at drawing, you could imagine them having notebooks like Leonardo da Vinci's, the way he used to sketch out his inventions. And I know lab notebooks are online now, but you could snap a picture from your sketchbook and put it in there. This is an example of a drawing that I did recently, just when I was exploring this idea, and it's from my PhD research. But when I drew it, I started having these ideas about experiments that I really wish that I had tried, but hadn't occurred to me when I didn't draw it like this. Um, Of course, there's much more to this than representational art. There's also just ways of using art to increase creativity. This is one exercise called the scribble sketch. And what you do is you just take a blank piece of paper and a pencil and just draw a bunch of loopy lines overlapping, creating kind of organic shapes. And then you stop and put down the pencil and you look at it for a while and you turn it upside down and you look at it some more and you kind of start to see something in it, kind of like a Rorschach test if people remember those. And then once you see something, you just turn it into that, just develop it. And this can really build that creative muscle in a way that can translate to scientific creativity as well. Another way is metaphors. Metaphors are a really powerful way to build creativity. Um, and it's really about the process of coming up with a metaphor. Asking a chatbot for a metaphor for your work may work, you'll get one, but you would completely miss out on the benefit of it. And what's cool about metaphor is it's a great way to practice sharing your work with non-scientists, a way to share it with your family. But no metaphor is perfect. And this is important. We could have a whole separate talk about how metaphors could even be dangerous, and people are talking about that too. But what's cool is that when you find the holes in the metaphor, which there certainly are, you start thinking about your work in a different way. You've sort of opened this new channel in your brain, and now you're thinking about it creatively. And it can also inspire cover art. So this is an example of a piece that I made a few years ago about a phosphorylated protein that holds a really very rigid shape and so that it protects its phosphate, because if it's floppy, then this phosphatase will snatch the phosphate away from it very quickly. And so in mutants of this protein that are more flexible, that phosphate gets taken, and it had implications in pancreatic cancer. And another way you can explore with metaphors is something called the braided essay. And this is now getting into another art form, which is creative writing. So, especially people who enjoy that sort of thing, this is another way to do that. And the idea with the braided essay is to kind of take a scientific concept and maybe weave in some personal story. So I wrote this one about a paper came out of my undergraduate research lab just a few years ago about a peptidic material that makes this 3D kind of sponge-like material that cells can grow inside of, and it creates this supportive environment for cells to grow, and it has implications in tissue regeneration. And so I wrote about that, but braided in the personal story of my time as an undergraduate researcher in her lab in this place that was a very supportive environment for me to grow into a scientist. And it was sort of a love letter to the chemistry department at Purdue at that time. And I did it to kind of argue for sustained funding for undergraduate research. So that's another fun way to just kind of dig a little deeper um, into metaphors. And then lastly, stop animation is a really great way to question assumptions. And so Peter knows this, of course. You just heard Peter's talk that when you have to animate a process, you really have to understand why. And Janet Iwasa knows this well. She was an early inspiration of mine. She was a PhD scientist turned animator, and now she's on the faculty at the University of Utah. And she has been making art with scientists for decades in this way. And she's seen how making animations forces them to ask new questions and inspire new experiments. But there can be a large barrier to entry for the average scientist to start making animations because there's the cost associated with the software. You have to learn the software. But with stop motion animation, you don't need anything but a free app, and maybe some Play-Doh or some little, toys that you have around. I won't get into the details of this for the sake of time, but it can be a really low barrier to entry. It could be something that's very cool for your talks, and it could definitely open some more questions about your work. And you could make this as a prototype that then maybe hand off to somebody like Peter to develop something that you could use for other purposes as well. So I will leave you with that. Invite you to check out my newsletter if you're interested in these sorts of ideas. This is definitely something I'm going to be thinking about and probably writing about in terms of how can we really do this and put it into practice. Some initial ideas are, a lot of grants have these broader impacts budgets built in. So what if people used their broader impact budget, maybe pooled them with others to bring in like an artist in residence to do this kind of work with people? Um, there's also some schools have science communication courses. There are some medical schools that are now teaching art classes to medical students. I'd love to see that in more science departments as well. So, like, let's talk to people and tell them how important this is to train young scientists to think in this way and to have these sorts of skills. There are artist in residence programs, of course. The Broad Institute has one. Colorado State University has one, and also maybe even just tapping into the artists who are already in those labs. I can tell you that there's probably an artist in almost every lab, and I know that a lot of them don't feel comfortable letting that side of them out or letting that side of them be seen, but they could be sort of like art ambassadors and working with an external science artist and that kind of, the way that you enact change in a community by going in and finding the trusted leaders. And this could be really a way to pull these things together. So these are just some ideas, many more, and that's it. And that concludes the talks. And so I will welcome everybody to stick around for a panel discussion where you can ask us all whatever questions you still have. And thank you so much.